Okay. Today, my guest is Professor Kathleen Eisenhardt. I'll keep my introduction short to maximize our time with her. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Kathleen as a person. Professor Eisenhardt is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally, as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I will skip many of her accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Professor Eisenhardt is an honorary fellow of the AIB, is the recipient of the AIB Fellows Eminent Scholar Award, and she's also the fellow of the Academy of Management, SMS, World Economic Forum, and the Clinton Global Initiative. She sits on the boards of international companies and has served on editorial boards of ASQ, OrgScience, AMJ, AMR, SMJ, and SEJ. She has received many awards for her scholarship, including AOM's Scholarly Contribution Award, Global Award for Entrepreneurship Research, the Irwin Award for Strategy Research, the Distinguished Scholar Awards from OMT and TIMSS divisions, ASQ Scholarly Contribution Award for the Most Influential Paper 5 years after publication, and SMS's Shandell Best Paper Prize. In addition to over 100 articles, she is the author of several award-winning books that are on Amazon's top 10 business and investing books category. She was recently noted as the most cited research author in strategy and organization studies for the past 25 years. I might have saved a lot of time if I said she won every award in every area, and please see the bio. But thank you, Kathleen, for joining us.
Well, thank you all, guys. It's a pleasure to be with you and with everyone tuning in.
Thanks. First question, what did you want to become when you were a child?
When I was a child, well, when I was a child, I don't know that I was that forward thinking. But by the time I got to college, I wanted to be a professor. So I was 19 and I knew I wanted to be a professor.
Professor in what?
I didn't know what that part wasn't. That part I didn't know, but I liked the idea of, I liked school. I was good at school, so I liked thinking about ideas. I also liked what I perceived to be the flexibility. So as I thought I had my summer off, which it turns out I didn't really have. But I liked being my own boss. So I liked the entrepreneurial aspect of it, and I liked the teaching aspect. I was drawn to the engaging with students and also the showmanship of teaching. I enjoy putting on a show. So I enjoy helping people, but I enjoy the show too. So it just was, so at 19, I said, I want to do this. My first PhD program that I got into was in mechanical engineering. I didn't obviously do, but yeah, I wanted to be a professor, pretty younger than most people, I think, in terms of deciding what they want to do.
Who was the most influential person in your life for directing you towards academia?
I don't know. I don't know. Whenever I'd done a couple of books, as you mentioned. My mother mostly cared that my picture was good, and my dad was interested in the content. But then I was always sort of a little embarrassed. Like a couple times he came to my class, oh, my dad's here. So I don't know. I don't know that I had anybody that was that influential for me. I mostly just sort of looked at things. I thought teaching was great because I had this concept of, what are the 3 best reasons to be a teacher? June, July, and August. I had that idea. And I thought, oh, but younger kids, you have to, behavior problems. College looks like the spot. So I had this kind of idea, but then it took me a while to sort of figure out and I had no idea what research was. I just didn't know that at all.
It's something that you wouldn't put on your CV, but would be of interest to audience.
What would be on my CV or not
on your CV?
Not on my CV. Oh gosh. I mean, obviously I have a life, that's not on the CV. I'd say an interesting aspect of maybe my career that I think a number of other people share, but that I had my children. I had one when I started graduate school. I mean, I had my kids fairly young. I had my kids in my 20s. So I had one when I started graduate school, one in the middle of graduate school, and then, on the ramp up to tenure. And on the one hand, that was really kind of crazy and hectic, managing little children. And my husband was a CEO, so he was pretty busy with his job. So what it did, I think, is I think it kept me more balanced in terms of what's the big picture of life. So yes, my career is important and fun, and I love it, but it isn't the only thing. And so I always had my family first. So I was 3/4 time. That's what people wouldn't know. I was 3/4 time for 5 years when I was just starting out as a professor and my kids were still pretty young. So that I'd have time, because I didn't have kids to have somebody else watch them. So I was involved with the PTA. I coached soccer. I coached softball. I'm a sports person too. So I wanted to enjoy my kids and my family. So that was very, I think, balancing, and made my productivity slow to take off. I'd say if you actually looked at my resume, you'd see what the dates of things were. But I have no regrets about that.
So the question was, do you have any regrets? Well, you don't.
No, I don't. I love my job. I loved it from the day one. It's what I wanted to do, and it's better than I thought it would be. So yeah, I don't really have any regrets. No.
What are you most proud of?
Well, certainly my kids and my grandkids. I think that's what I'm most proud of in my world. So I certainly enjoy them, and my friends and family. But professionally, I have certain articles that are my favorites. I don't know if you're asking me professionally or personally now, but
okay. If you stop doing what you're doing today, what is the second best career plan or alternative plan for you?
Yeah, you gave me that question in advance, and I must be a very non-introspective person, but I don't know what I would do. In high school, at least here in the States, we used to take these tests where it said what you should be when you grow up, and I was supposed to be a lawyer. So that was my number one thing, and the thing I was not supposed to be was a music teacher. So that was like the bottom, which is probably because I have terrible rhythm. I don't know why, but so I don't know what I would do had I not gotten tenure. I don't know, because I think I found the career that was really the career that worked best for me.
Okay, now let's talk about research.
You a personal thing. Can I go back to personal?
Of course.
Yeah, well, I'm a sports person, and what people wouldn't know is I was a pretty avid I still am a pretty avid backpacker. So 10 days out kind of backpacking. So anybody wants tips on the Sierras in particular, I know a lot about that. I also ski, play tennis, so a bunch of different sports things.
Wow.
And then one of my kids was a bassoon player, and so I had to go to classical music concerts, which I kind of got to enjoy. But basically, I'm a sports person.
Do you still do backpacking?
I do. It's gotten shorter. We now quit at noon and hang out. But I still like to go. It's still an amazing break to get out in nature, to get away. Your cell phone doesn't work. It's great. You're just disconnected. It's really, I think it's fabulous.
But you're backpacking in the U.S., right? You're not
in the U.S.
Okay.
Yeah, in the Sierras, which is the big range in California.
Okay. Now the research part.
Okay, now the research. Okay.
You've written in many different areas. How does a person who has written in many different areas tell what she does to people who don't read her work regularly or in journals? Like you're stranded in a pub, locals don't know who you are. What do you say?
What do I say? I don't say too much, actually. I teach at the border of economics and sociology because people understand that. If people understand a little more, I say I study strategy and organizing in high-tech companies. With my friends and my family, they don't care, which is one of the reasons why I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Simple Rules with Don Sull, Simple Rules for a Complex World. I wrote that book, which is a pop book, if you will, so my book group would read it. Because they don't care. So I wanted to write a book that actually connected with a broader audience. But yeah, I say something fairly simple, like I study strategy and organizing in tech companies.
It's so interesting. I mean, you got neighbors. Do they realize how famous you are?
They do sort of, but sort of nice because your neighbors are like I live in a neighborhood. I've lived in the same neighborhood for 40 years, and so we're all friends. Our kids grew up together. We're talking about our kids and travel and husbands, and we're talking about that. We're not talking about work too much. So it occasionally comes up, and in my investment club it comes up.
Okay.
But I took my granddaughter to the academy. She was about 8, and we'd run into people and they say, "Oh, do you realize how famous your grandmother is?" And she finally was saying, "Oh, Graham, I'm so sick of that."
It's fun. Okay. Does your granddaughter want to become an academic after this experience or not?
I don't know. I would hope so, because I think it's such a great job. So I hope she'd think about that. But she's only 11, so she's still kind of bouncing around from day to day. And I think she may have discovered boys too. So who knows what's going to happen, at least in the short run.
Okay. Now, about understudied areas in IB.
Yeah, understudied areas in IB. I'm thinking more, not so much about IB per se, but I think the understudied area, at least in the world that I look at, is growth firms. We know a lot about ventures. We know a lot about the big companies. The Alibabas, the Nikes, the SAPs. Name your continent. But we don't know much about adolescent. When companies have kind of made it, kind of like where an Airbnb would be today. They've made a DJI in China, where they're clearly successful companies. Clearly, they're here for the long run. But how do they grow from what I've studied a lot, sort of simple rules kinds of things, to what I actually consult about, which is big companies? How do they get to that? How do they go through the adolescent period? I think that's a huge research opportunity to think about adolescents in companies. The other thing I'm thinking about these days is different kinds of businesses have different economics. So strategy and organization in a marketplace like an Airbnb is different from a product company, let's say like Nike, or even a platform company like the iPhone and the App Store, or ecosystem. So that they're or another thing we're looking at is organizing and strategizing in markets where there's a strong institutional component. So healthcare or defense, or we're looking actually at universities right now. So businesses that do university type stuff. So I think the two areas that I'm seeing is this sort of growth, this idea of what does an adolescent organization look like, or a firm, and then the idea of how does strategy vary depending upon what are the underlying economics. For example, is there a product or not? So we're looking, for example, at online fashion. So companies like Stitch Fix or Rent the Runway, where you have inventory, which is a whole different ball game than a pure software play when you actually have to carry inventory. So trying to understand those kind of dynamics. Finally, in terms of IB, I have long thought that the best companies were all sort of the same, and it didn't matter that much what the cultural context was. I mean, yes, as a Chinese company, a bit different, sure, but good Chinese companies look like good US companies or Canadian companies or European companies. I'm now thinking more about, particularly with the rise of more nationalism, that maybe it's time to also look more at how people are engaging in cultural differences. Which I mostly ignored, and sort of because at the multinational level, I think they are pretty similar.
I'm asking the guests what they think about nationalism versus globalization now that the political winds are changing a little. Do you think nationalism is going to keep its prominence, its importance?
I don't know. I mean, I can say, I think in the States that people like me, and probably you, and probably most of the audience, did well with globalization. But there are a whole lot of people who didn't. And I think we have to take more care of that. And I don't know if that means more or less nationalism, but I think it does mean that if we have a globalized economy, we have to, at least in our own countries, bring along everybody, not just the elite who happen to be educated. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think we're going to have to make society fairer.
Interesting. I mean, there's increased increased attention on income disparity, for sure. Capitalism arguments are really abound. I'm curious about one thing. How does your creativity take shape, or what does your mind think of when it wanders freely in a state of idle curiosity? Like, where does the creativity
Where does it go? I actually have not thought of my own research projects since my PhD. I'm not very good at a blank sheet of paper. If you just hand me a blank sheet of paper, I'm not so good at it. If you hand me, something that's got something on it, then I can take it and then I can do things with it. So I work a lot with students, and the way I work with them, which I think is maybe coming up a little bit later in the interview, but I'll say it now, is that we always do a project they want to do. And that's where sort of the new idea comes from. But then I think of how to make it better, more original, more cutting edge, more tied to the research. So it's a partnership where I don't think of my own ideas, but I do take other things and I can see how they connect and I can see what to do with them. And that's kind of where I add value. So I add value by taking something on a piece of paper and making it better. And I noticed in your email to me, you mentioned one of my colleagues, or one of our colleagues, gets his ideas from walking for an hour. And I thought about that and I said, my son told me this: men think better moving and women think better sitting. And I see, when I'm walking, I don't think very much. I think a little bit, but I might lie in bed, or I might have a doodle, but I don't move when I think. I sit, or I lie in bed in the morning and think about it. So yeah, so I take something on a paper, and I create on a piece of paper.
Interesting. I'm collecting data as I'm doing these interviews. Hopefully, this will turn into a paper, at least a paper. I never thought about man versus woman in this aspect. This is interesting.
Yeah, my son said, men like actually when he was growing up, we would play catch, and he was much more talkative when we were playing catch than if I sat him down in a chair.
Interesting. About the evolution in the field, well, not only for IB, but the evolution in organizational studies from strategy, entrepreneurship, in the past to today. What is the evolution? What are we losing along the way from where we started, to where we're going? Where are we going?
I think we've gone from static models, so agency theory, transaction costs, that at least in the strategy area were very static models, to more dynamic ways of thinking. So I think that's been a big change, is moving towards, what for me was really great, because in studying a lot of tech companies, that's what tech companies are about. They're about change. They're not about static. They're not about optimizing. So I think that's been a big change over the past while. What have we lost? I don't know what we've lost. I don't know. I don't know. I can't answer that one. I don't.
Okay. And which area is
too much, didn't I?
No, which research area is overly studied? And I think we have beaten the horse enough on that one, that it is not fruitful anymore.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Oh, what we beaten the horse on? I don't want to step on anybody's toes. All I can say is, if you're running interaction terms, it's been studied, and I never wanted to run interaction terms.
Interesting. Okay.
I'm excited about machine learning these days. I don't know if you or whoever watching this knows. I did a paper bringing together multi-case theory building and machine learning last summer. It's an SMJ, and I'm very excited about that, because I didn't realize it till I got into machine learning. Machine learning is algorithmic multi-case theory building. So it's intellectually absolutely the same thing. So it was really fun to make that connection between the very big data and the very small, and see that the underlying intellectual process is the same. So that was very exciting for me. I'm an engineer and a science person, and so that was super exciting.
At what level? At what level is applicable machine learning applicable?
Well, because the way you do multi-case theory building is you keep iterating through the data and trying to find matches and patterns. You're looking for they're both about pattern matching. And so you iterate through the data, and you never try to optimize on any one case. You're moving the levels of abstraction up and down, so that, people sometimes say to me, well, how do you always make your cases fit? And it's because I can move abstraction levels and go to the right abstraction level, so I can get the fit. And that's that same idea of iteration, looking for the pattern, looking for the fit for all the cases. That's the same as machine learning, and that concern about overfitting and the value of multiple cases, not one. So that was fun, and I people read different magazines. I'm a Scientific American reader.
What are the top three most influential classics that students should read?
What classics should students read? Well, I can give a few Eisenhardt papers. No. I got a few of them.
Okay.
I don't know that there's a must read. I've never thought that way. So I think more in terms of what are you interested in, and what's really the thing that the papers that really speak to that. So
Okay.
I'm a bit more about theories and topics, because there's so many great papers over the years. I couldn't pick out 2 or 3 and say, oh, that you've got to read those.
Okay. Advice and mentoring. What are the major mistakes that you see junior faculty, PhD students to make?
Yeah, I think one is doing too many things at once. I think I learned early on from my colleague Bob Sutton the rule of 3 papers makes a stream, and so to finish an area before you move to the next one. So like I did 3 papers on agency theory, which was a theory I never loved. It's my dissertation, but I did the 3, and I think it was valuable for me to do that. I think another, so 3 papers makes a stream, don't do too much, and finish. I think there are a lot of people who can start a paper, but I think the really successful people in the field can finish one and take a paper that's pretty good and make that paper great by just staying with it one more time, one more iteration. And when other people are sick of it, to do that one more rev. So I think the skill that's overlooked, like starting gets the glamour, but finishing gets the pub. And I think that finishing. So I try to work with my students on that. The other thing I do with my students is even though a lot of times we're doing theory building, I believe in a great lit review, that you start research with a really good lit review. So whatever the topic is, that topic inside and out. So that then when you do your study, what's the gap you're filling? What's the contribution you're making?
Which skills are most difficult to develop?
Writing. I think a lot of people in our field, at least certainly that I see, maybe it's more engineering school, but I think it's maybe broader than that. Lots of people can go take a bunch of stats classes and be stats whizzes, but you can hire stats people. You can't hire writers. And so I think the undervalued skill or the hard skill to learn is to write well. So again, I think people naturally, easily, they learn stats and they learn a method, but I think what separates people is the ability to write and to use ideas. And that's the skill that I think takes time to learn. And you partly can learn it through a lit review, because then you start to realize what's been said about the topic that I'm interested in, whatever that might be. And then how can I be helpful, influential in that topic?
My formal training is in economics, and I like to read the very, very old classics from turn of the century, and the way how they are beautifully written, how they are almost poetic.
Turn of the which century? Like 2000 or 1900?
1900, of course.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Oh yeah, there's actually a century there. Well, things have changed in the way that we write, people write. And I think I like the old style better. So why do we see this? Obviously, I mean, this is coming up in a couple of these interviews about writing. My advisor, strategy advisor was Jay Barney. I mean, he's a great writer. My IB advisor is Odette Shankar. He's a great writer. These people write superbly well. And when you ask them, you know, can you please cite me your first page? And they can actually recite it. They have memorized it because they've written it 25 times already. Yeah. They verbatim, you can basically follow it. They have memorized their first page. Could you talk about this talent, or maybe the skill?
There are people who have a talent. Like my colleague Bob Sutton is natively a better writer than I am. In fact, when I was in college, I used to take courses because they had no paper. Oh, I'll take that course. There's no paper. And so I've learned to write. You know, I'm an engineer, a science person. It took me a while to learn to write. So I think it's practicing. I think probably the one trick that I have is in my papers, I try to make it so if all you do is read the first sentence of a paragraph, you can follow the paper. And I try to show my students some of those kinds of tricks of how to do things.
What's the most valuable lesson you learned in your career?
My career? I'd say the most valuable lesson is that we're not in a competition. We're in a group of people who ought to be helping each other out. So I become increasingly feeling, I've become an easier reviewer, I think, than I was when I was younger. So I think this sort of sense that everybody's trying to do a good job and trying to help each other out and lift each other up, I think is probably the lesson I've learned. That I think is a really important lesson for the community of scholars that we're all in.
Kathleen, this was very helpful for me. This was very informative. What's the one question that I should have asked you but haven't?
What's the one question? Let's see. Anything I wanted to share? No, I know I should be thinking of something. I'm trying to think of something and I can't think of it. Yeah, I know the lesson. Another thing I would just share as a last point, and that is that there's sort of a game to play on your way to tenure that we all know of a certain number of publications in a certain number of places, and everyone's school is unique on that, and you kind of have to do that, and maybe even to full. But after that, you can really make your own world. And that's what's so great about this profession. You can go and become a dean, you can continue in research, you can be an editor, you can write for the popular audience. And even when you make those choices, you can go back and do all the other things. So you can, what's great about the career, I think for people, is we can be different things at different times. And I certainly have done that myself of, I played the guru for a while, but then so then I wanted to go back to research, and then I did the popular book. And so I think people should not feel locked in to the 35-page paper format in the A journals and branch out, and particularly after tenure, do other things with your platform.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you, Kathleen.
Okay, thanks a lot, you guys. Are we off now?